Hello, Defiers! Thank you for joining us on another episode of our audio series where the developers of Dawn of Defiance talk about upcoming features on our early access roadmap. I'm Monday, Trega's community manager, and as you may already know, we started this series to help keep players updated during development, particularly in periods between our major planned updates, and to give you more insider knowledge about the work happening behind the scenes. So if you haven't yet, please check out the last episodes on our YouTube channel. Before we jump into our topic and introduce our guests, just a recap on February. We released a minor patch at the beginning of the month to improve and align our combat with some additional changes coming to the Sisters of the Deep update. Sisters of the Deep is well underway and on track for early Q2, and our next devlog will not be a part of this audio series, but will be a deeper dive into some of the art and environments we've been working on to get you excited for that. Also, you'll notice we're here to talk about UI updates and not the combat overhaul, which I'd requested questions for previously. That's because we decided to save that conversation for a later time when we can give you a more in-depth look at that topic rather than something surface level. But if you submitted questions, they will be saved and addressed in the future. Now let's get into our episode, which is particularly important to me because I'm professionally mainly a graphic designer and I'm helping with the new UI art myself, so I'm really excited to start sharing that with you in the Sisters of the Deep update. Today we're here with Dwight, who can introduce himself.
Hey, how's it going, guys? I'm the art director.
And also Micah is here today, who guest starred in the last episode briefly. Can you introduce yourself as well?
Hey guys, it's Micah. I'm a designer.
We always start these with the most important questions in the episode. So let's start with, if you had to have a map marker that represented you on a map, what would it be?
Dwight, what would yours be?
I would just say it's going to be an icon of a German Shepherd because I just got one recently. So, yeah.
And we're going to tell Dwight that he owes us a puppy tax for referencing his dog in this video.
Yeah. So, yeah, I could probably do something like that, you know.
Okay, and Micah?
Mine would be a penguin because I like penguins.
I knew it.
It's always a penguin.
All right, another very important question that I need to know. If your life had a settings menu, what are you adjusting first?
I'm turning motion blur off.
What?
Okay.
Wait, what? What does that mean? You have astigmatism or something?
No, I'm just turning motion blur off. It should always be off.
Based.
Just everything in life, even films, games, like just off everywhere.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, settings in life. What are we talking about here? It's just anything like yourself, the house you live in, like just
No,
whatever.
it has to be in Dawn of Defiance.
Oh, it has to be in. Okay,
Turning RTX on or off.
maybe lighting. Just max that out at all times. It's like just like mega ultra settings all the time. Just give me the sun.
Now for the real questions on the UI update. As with all episodes, we're covering a topic on the roadmap, and UI updates is probably one on the list, which players are not as enthusiastic about, because everyone wants to request the cool weapons and cool enemies and more quests. But we all know the importance of UI ultimately in making all of those other experiences feel good. So could we start with, when we say UI, what all are we referring to? Thinking immediately the HUD, the main menu, and things like that.
UI and UX are often brought up together. UI covers the graphics, but UX covers the actual experience of the player interacting with the world and interacting with the HUD and responding to different bits of information that are presented to them. So, in general, like you said, it can cover everything from the first thing you see when you launch the game in the main menu, all the way to the HUD in game and how you're interacting with facilities and picking weapons and stuff via like the hotbar. But it also goes beyond that, just with decisions that we make more on like the design side of what information do we even present to the player, when do we present it to them, which different methods of HUD do we use to like allow the player to interact with things in the game, because there's a lot of different options available to us if you just compare yourself to any other game that's already been created. So a lot of it's making choices like that that's going to best suit your game.
For us, I think the UI has been an interesting thing because we don't have a dedicated UI person. not for art or engineering. And like other parts of the games, we have the foundation of the UI in place, but a lot of it is waiting for us to come back and flesh it out, add improved art. So where would we say the state of the UI is at the moment and where the most work needs to be done?
Definitely a mixed bag for us right now. Some things are like very far along, and if we didn't touch tomorrow, I'd be fine with that being what we see at 1.0. The radial wheel for the arrows is like just really solid. And then there's other things that are still pretty temporary. Some of that just comes down to like the system itself might not even be fully where we want that to be long term. We have to make a decision and either wait until the system is 100%, create the interface for that, or we might have to like make an interface now. That system might change, and then you have to like redo work in the future. A lot of that plays a role in like the decision making of what exactly we're going to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
You do want minimal double work when it comes to this stuff. So we can, I don't know, we can talk about this later, but you have the wireframing for some of these initial systems, and we get that into the game. And visually speaking, yeah, you're seeing the layout of everything and what that menu is actually giving to you as the player when it comes to functionality. But then you have the graphics behind it, and then you have the audio, and then you have the special effects and the motion graphics and so on and so forth. So you have that extra bit that fulfills the more on the experience side as well. And you can definitely see that in some of the menus, right? Like some are ahead more than others. Those that we feel that are kind of like lacking for the most part, those will eventually get an update, like what Mike is saying. When that system is fully fleshed out, you should see a significant difference with those.
So I also wanted to talk about widgets and menus that players can expect to be updated or added, whether that's for the Sisters of the Deep update or beyond. Something on my mind specifically is possible reuse of a widget for refineries where you will be able to select from a radial which items to input. Could you talk about that, or maybe we're not sure that will be added?
With anything really, I think that there's a question of if it ever gets done, if it gets done soon, or if it's coming in this next update. But like that is definitely one of the bigger UX concerns I at least have on my radar that we should probably address. That is something where I made a decision based on an experience within another game, and then a different part of our UI behaves differently than that other game. And so once it made it into our game, it's just not intuitive. It just doesn't feel and work the same way that I was expecting it to. So like that's just like an L that we take on like that system. And so you just like hope that you get the opportunity to go back in there and modify that. So as you said, I've been thinking about switching that to like a radial wheel where when you interact with a refinery, such as like the butcher's block, that you would have the option via an entirely new interface compared to what's in the game right now to actually select exactly what item you want to put into it based on whatever you have in your inventory. And hopefully that just presents itself a lot better to the player, especially since we already have a interface with the arrow wheel that has been like very positive in terms of feedback.
Are there other quality of life additions coming to the UI that we can talk about? Things like how we've added an add stacks to chest button.
There's probably like 50 things in our database at least that are very much so quality of life stuff, whether it's stuff that we just thought about internally or stuff that players have requested. A lot of us, we play these games and like there's plenty of tedious and annoying things, and then we fix them with mods. So like half of it is just thinking through, hey, when I played this, like what mod did I end up using to fix this thing? And like how did it make it just better to play and let us get to the fun stuff rather than sorting inventories all day? Because like I'm somebody who will sit in the base and make sure that there's one item in every chest, one type of item in every chest, and spend hours perfecting it. But then I also like enjoy that mod that just does it for me. So there's tons of things like that where we've already done the kind of compulsive sort thing where it only adds items that are already in the chest. But there's plenty of other things that we have marked down as nice to have, so it would make that experience even better.
Now, I'm recalling players in Discord, for instance, expressing confusion over the continue versus start button and being able to find their world settings quicker. Could you share some designer thinking behind some minor UI feedback like that?
That's just like one small example, specific example, rather, of something that I can point to like 5 other games that work in the exact same way. So there's a certain level of, I know that this works. A continue button, in my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinions, should just take you right into the game and not have any steps in between. It's just a one button, get back into the experience that I was playing. The start game is the method that you get back into setting up your world, and we can take steps there to actually make things more prominent and easier to find when it comes to getting back to setting up your world and changing settings. And then we've also thought in the past, we haven't done a lot of work on this, but that there might be a day where you can just update settings directly from within the world. So that would also just take away that desire, because you wouldn't even have to, you could hit continue and then make it so that your refinery speed is improved, for example.
That would be nice.
For the quality of life stuff and the confusions with the main menu, are there some improvements that we can make with that? Yeah, that's perfectly fine. But I really just trust on Micah's judgment on what words do we use and where we put them. I know that when he's wireframing these things and he's choosing certain terminology, names, naming conventions, placement on certain things, why things need to be at the corner of the screen or the bottom right corner of the screen. I know that he has a bunch of other wireframes and other wordage that he's like really playing through on the back end. So I never think that everything that he does is like arbitrary.
In relation to making the settings easier to find, I'm aware we're working to come through and improve various existing menus in game, from the paint menu to the character screen and the like. Can you help the players understand the thought process behind that work and how it's coming along?
I'm looking at this from different steps of production, right? So we've got how the menus are laid out, how much space on the screen does it take up, what exactly do you want to show on the screen while that menu is up, and how other elements on the HUD play with each other when you have, depending on what you have up on the screen. Some things are a full screen experience. Some things like the new incoming compendium that's coming in is going to take up more of the screen, which may mean that you may not see, your character entirely, but there's a lot of information we're throwing at the player. It's like those decisions right there, just trying to find something where we can have like these menus where they're kind of one off. There's some that are a little bit larger than each other, some that are full screen, some that are not. But there's still level of consistency across the board where when you operate in one menu and then you go to the other one, it's not this large task of, well, how do I work this menu again? No, there should be some baseline across all of them where it's easy to navigate, and it's pretty straightforward to like access the information that you want. The other end of this is the visual side when I'm talking about consistency, right? So this is some of the stuff that Michael was talking about earlier on, like, some menus feel like they're farther on than others. I'd extend that to some of the graphics as well, some of the backgrounds, some of the containers for some of these informations. If you look at the inventory menu versus some of like the workbenches that we have, for like the armory, the forge, so on and so forth. The artisan bench is another example where the menu for that is slightly larger. It's a little bit of a different format. Those things can take a little bit of improvement as well. Um, and I will preface this with, not all of that's a lot to really ask, just for like this one update, along with all of the other things that we're doing. So not everything would be addressed, but at least some of the biggest pain points, we could safely say that, it should be resolved when you actually get this update. And every update after that, you should see more and more things come online, especially with some of the systems that Mike is talking about here. As those get fleshed out, you would continuously see an improvement, which goes back to, the reminder of we're in early access, right? So like this is 100% normal for this. The entire game's not going to get complete over the next update or two, right? It's a long game, right? Like part of the early access experience that you're buying into is that you are actually along for the ride as we continue to update and improve the game, right? So UI is not an exception to that rule.
Could you also walk us through the process of implementing UI For instance, when we have identified a player need or a player problem, like in this case, we were mentioning the new player experience needed some improvements. What comes next to beginning to address that sort of problem and getting that UI into the game?
Yeah, so it definitely, that first step just kind of depends on whether it's something that's core to the game. We know we for sure need it, like a health bar or a hot bar. That's going to be okay. We know the need, we know why it's there. On that front, I'm typically just doing research using things like the game UI database. It's just a website that has screenshots and other utilities that are from thousands of other games. It's a really useful thing for UI design. And then I'm comparing it to other games, using that to compare it to other games in our genre and just thinking through, what does the function actually serve? Does that exist in our game? Something as simple as the health bar is like an obvious one, but how you might switch between arrow types would differ based on game. So just thinking through, hey, what's the best way for us to go about solving this problem essentially? And then from there, once you kind of get a good idea of that stuff, I tend to wireframe first, and that's more of a preliminary thing to make sure that all of the different elements in the game are going to work together, because you change one thing, you tend to affect 5 things that are nearby it or 5 things that are attached to it. And then that wireframe would kind of go to art to fill out and provide feedback of, hey, is this going to work? Because art, while a lot of it is just like stylizing, it also just helps bring attention to different parts of the UI, making things more prominent, contrasts more, and like grabbing the player's attention when and where we need it to be. And then from there, it's usually implementation is actually getting those art assets into the game. But we've kind of gone back and forth on whether the implementation process comes first in the wireframing thing, which a lot of that is just driven by the fact that we're an early access game and we can't just have everybody available at all times to do whatever we need them to do. So sometimes certain things come before other things, and I don't think that's been too bad for us. But then you ask kind of like, when it's more nice to have thing of like, or a response from players of, hey, this just isn't like working out, that is definitely like a different approach of, a lot of times players, no offense, are good at telling you what's wrong but not why it's wrong. So they might tell you that this thing sucks, but you have to be able to identify like, what is that root cause that's actually causing it to suck. And just because they tell you, hey, change this, that doesn't mean that you need to change that. Like, you need to figure out, why are they asking for this thing on like a root level. And then with that, you have to realize that like decisions aren't made in like a vacuum. As I said before, when you change one thing, it changes 40 other things. We support keyboard and we can support controllers, so we only have so many buttons on the controller to play with, for example. So like, there's a lot of decisions around that to try and figure out what is the best way that we are going to address that issue. And then it kind of goes back into that normal flow of, okay, if the wireframe is needed, how do we do that? Maybe it's just the implementation that needs to rework.
Depending on what the ask is or what the task is, that can mean the difference between, in one production cycle, there's a lot of back and forth between the wireframing and the art. And then in another task, none of that's happening. And there's a lot of back and forth between art and implementation. Because in some cases you have a wireframe, but then when art does a pass on it, it's, well, we can make this actually look really good if you moved one or two things. Are we allowed to do that? And then it's up to the designer to decide, like, hey, I can't really do that because if I move this, like what Mike is saying, it's going to screw up 3 other things that are around it. So we can't. This part of the wireframe you got to like really respect. But like, yeah, we can kind of nudge in some of these other areas. So that's an example of art and wireframe going back and forth with each other. And then you have the art and implementation, where The wireframing art is just fine. There's no issue there, but it may be a complex task that needs to get done. And when we're implementing some of the graphics, we come across a couple of stumbling blocks where, okay, we may need to break up a graphic into 3 different pieces instead of just bringing it in as one. And we only caught that by going through the implementation process and things aren't behaving with each other. Or vice versa. We instead of having in 3 different pieces, we find out, hey, we can't just bring this in as one thing and there's not going to be any issues, and those decisions really is the back and forth between getting into the engine, the implementation, and the art. And not every task, like I said, is created equal. So like it really just depends. Very rarely do I see a straight cut path between prototyping to wireframing all the way to implementation where there's no back and forth anywhere. Like it's just not really realistic. There's always something that comes up where there's an opportunity of improvement or something can be optimized or something needs to be re-exported in a different way. And I think that's why when it comes to the UI and the UX bleeding, over each other, you know, you may get in all these things in the engine, but if it doesn't feel right, there's some adjustments that need to be made. And then at that point, you have to figure out, is it all the way back to wireframing? Is it just an art thing? Or did we just implement it the wrong way? So um, I'd say this question we're really calling out here is you could spend an entire dev talk just on that alone and
Mhm.
really break that down to the player on like, hey man, here's why this menu is set up this way. It's because you got to think about the notification bar and you only have this much space when it comes to the hotbar that's right below it. Like, does all this make sense? And like why that's different from like just some of the other elements in the game, right? There's a lot to talk about there alone. It's a pretty layered thing when it comes to like the production process.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate a couple of things that he just said. Like, there's always the chance at the end of that implementation process of you getting into game and just realizing flat out, this sucks, this doesn't work, and you just kind of have to go back to the drawing board on a lot of things of that just didn't turn out like we thought it would. Usually, wireframing and getting that initial implementation, you kind of want to be able to do that before somebody goes and makes a ton of art, but most of the things that we do are built in a way that's even if the art is generated for it, it's not like entirely thrown away. It's like that's good, but just from the actual design side, there is always a chance that no, you just made a bad call and it's not feeling good. And we've done plenty of that on this project. The second thing is just during development, especially just trying to hit a early access window. There was a lot less back and forth between like wireframing and art. However, moving forward, I anticipate that there will just be more time to kind of slow down and make sure that what we're putting in is basically the final implementation of it, so we don't ever have to come back to these things. And you'll just see a lot better quality stuff going in moving forward.
In regards to the visual consistency for menus, we talked about how the arrow radial wheel is something that's pretty polished. Do you have other examples for players on the direction our menus will be heading in terms of art direction?
I'll definitely use the map as an example. The level of detail that we got into that with the graphics for the map markers, some of the information that we display on the bottom right corner of the screen, the styling of that, um, that will be a clear indicator of, at least on the visual side, where we're blending some of the glass semi-transparent effects with some of the Corinthian style of graphics for when it comes to uh, border style, color, the actual shapes of that border, and then how big some of these elements are, right? Like I think the map is a good example, and then some of the new panels that we're working on with the character screen, with the inventory, the skills menu, so on and so forth. I think when players get their hand on some of that stuff, that will be an even more clear representation of where we want to take these things. So hopefully that's enough for them to actually get a clear idea of where things are headed.
So we've mentioned we have some new art assets coming soon, and one of those includes the Compendium. So the Compendium is part of a larger effort to help with the new player experience generally, and a way for players to source information in game. Can you describe for us how this compendium will slot into the game?
The compendium, in my opinion, is basically like taking a wiki for any of these games and putting it into our game. That's honestly one of the biggest goals for me with the system is if I can prevent the player from going outside the game to look something up, like I've succeeded. The more that players, especially in this genre, tend to get confused on things, they go outside of the game to look it up. Like that's just a break in the immersion and the experience of the game. So while I don't want to rely on that, I'd rather take steps in the actual design of how quests lay out, how new items are introduced to the player and stuff. That should be the primary way that we avoid confusion amongst players. But when they need extra help, tutorials, information of how things get built into other things, as far as crafting and whatnot, behaviors of enemies, I want to be able to rely on the compendium to kind of fill in a lot of the stuff that's not so easy to just build functionally into the game through like the main player experience. And so this is going to attempt to be something that's very personal per player. So a lot of our game systems so far have been you can play with 4 players and basically everything is shared. So while the compendium will share certain information just based on the state of the game world that you're in, I would like it to be something where a player can feel like they are filling out their compendium as they go and as they're experiencing new things in the game. It's as if they're filling it out. And then also to the point where it kind of has a completionist mindset to it for the players who want to make sure that they've seen and done every single thing in the game. I don't want the player to feel like, oh, somebody else already did this for me. So trying to maintain as much of a idea of they're experiencing everything the game has to offer and they're filling out their own compendium. So there will be things like an achievement that marks that you've done everything in the game, basically, once you've filled out your compendium. There'll also be things like challenges when you're killing a certain animal that will feed into the compendium, and you'll use the compendium to drive. Have you killed this thing? How many times have you killed it? And kind of hold stats to it and stuff like that. So it's still being fleshed out a little bit, but in general, that is the idea of the compendium.
Alongside the compendium, we're adding pop-up widgets that will help with the new player experience, such as a pop-up to explain recipes you've picked up or explain a debuff you've just been inflicted with. Is there anything more we can expand on there?
So actually, I'll start with the idea that we're taking this update is really trying to take a look at the tutorialization of the game. A lot of players are getting into our game, whether they've played it and we're just doing things or played the genre and we're just doing things slightly different than other games that they've played in the genre, or an entirely new player to the genre just doesn't really know how these games work. We want to tutorialize the game a little bit more than we have been. So there's kind of 3 steps to it. It's updating the introductory quests to the game, the Nux pop-ups, and then the compendium. And it's kind of in that order, in my opinion, where the quests are the functional, they're the fun structure of the game, especially early on, that's going to try to, like I said earlier, introduce concepts at a good pace that are digestible and everybody can understand how the game works. So even the quests themselves are going to ensure that you've kind of proved that you understand a concept before moving on to a quest. The Nux is like an auxiliary bit of information that's going to supply extra tidbits and more detail to like as you're actually completing quests or as you're introduced to a new topic in the game. So, and then the Nux will have a we're calling it a deep link, which is just you can hold a button to go to a compendium page that reads even deeper into that topic. So again, I don't want the player to just have to rely on the Nux or have to rely on the compendium every time that they're introduced to a new topic, but it is there as a fallback to kind of fill in the gaps that are a lot more complicated to just present to the player in game. But the actual in game experience will always come first as far as tutorialization.
I believe that is all we were going to talk about in this episode. So if you two want to say goodbye to our players.
Goodbye, farewell. I bid you all adieu.
Peace.
thank you to everyone for listening. We've got more detailed teasers for Sisters of the Deep coming this month, so stay tuned. I have some planned polls coming to Discord as well pretty soon, so now's a good time to join us there if you haven't yet already. Check the link in the description or our bio for that, and follow us on social media to help other players find Dawn of Defiance. Until next time.